Hello and welcome to ArtShow. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me Tim Gierschick. Hey, Tim, how are you?
Hey, good morning. I'm doing well, thanks.
Great to have you on the show. Fan of your work, and I wanted to start right away by sharing a few images. Let's see if I can get this up. Fantastic. So I
Ah,
went on your website, and there was a plethora of pictures, and it was a tough to choose. But I really wanted to start with this particular picture. I think this is a great painting, sort of a powerhouse, and it's rather large.
it
Um,
is.
is there anything about this picture that I need to know? Is there a story behind this?
There is a bit of a story. The title will probably send you to a particular time and place, which is Super Spreader.
Uh-huh.
Um, I painted this sort of spanning the time between shutdown during the pandemic and shortly thereafter.
Hmm.
Uh, the impetus of it was that I wanted to do something large, but at the time I was just painting in the house,
Hmm.
which is not very large. So to start this out, I painted the general pattern on individual pieces of paper, which you might be able to kind of pick up on some of that underneath.
Hmm.
And then once I was starting to go back to the studio, I applied that to a larger canvas and then worked from there. So the impetus was actually pieces of paper painted during the pandemic at the house.
Did you know that you were going to paint a super spreader painting, or did it turn into that?
No, like many of my works, the the image sort of suggests the title or
Okay.
suggests the direction. It's
Okay.
really kind of a thrust and parry the whole time between me and the image. So,
Okay. That makes sense. So I have a really weird question about this. So uh I used to do images like with the where you're using the white with the two balls on the end.
mhm.
I used to do that because I was trying to suggest bone.
Oh yeah,
Is that what you were trying to do too?
that is a suggestion of bone here. Yeah,
Okay.
in fact, there's sort of a general suggestion of kind of cartoonish radioactivity, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because some of this was, I think, probably deep-seated psychological unsureness of what exactly we were dealing with and how strong it
Right.
was, and so my mind sort of often goes to the cartoony kind of approach. So,
So with COVID, most of the artists that I've talked to all said that COVID really sort of put a bent on their trajectory. It left an impression. Would you say the same?
um, a bend on the trajectory might be a bit much for me. I think it was probably more of a bump,
Okay.
and then I like redirected.
Okay. Did your
Um,
production of work go up?
I think it probably actually went down a little bit
Okay.
until after it was over, just because I didn't feel safe going to the studio at first. Um,
Well, I know that you had mentioned that you use found materials in some of your bases and some of your mounts that you're used.
in
Um,
some, yes.
is is that also because of COVID, or had you always done that?
No, I've done that for a long time. Yeah,
Okay.
that was sort of a someone this weekend asked me like, why latex? Why latex paint? I was like, well, this is a habit that started because I didn't have any money when I moved to the city, and
Right.
I went down to Home Depot in South Philly, and I bought, at the time you could buy an entire grocery cart or
Uh,
shopping cart of paint, like mist tints. And that's
right.
what I started with, and it's just kept going from there. But I've added other household paints like sign painting enamels,
Yeah.
spray paint, that sort of thing. And I
Some
use
artists so some artists talk to me about house paint. They're afraid to use it, and I'm like, well, that's what conservators are for, because they're already used to working with
some.
Jackson Pollock used house paint. So
Exactly. I work with conservators at the Barnes Foundation, and I mentioned in my worries to them once, and they said, "Don't worry about it. Do what you're doing. We'll worry
right.
about that."
Yeah.
So I
Otherwise, you
said,
put
"All
them out of
right,
a job.
yeah."
Right.
I said, "All right, that was my answer."
So I just happened to see your exhibition that you just recently had, and this picture was in it. So I had to
Mhm.
show it because I thought this was a real standout picture.
No, thanks.
Uh, my question for this is actually, are you actively seeking out a secret geometry within your work, or does it just happen automatically because you've been doing it for so long?
Hmm. That's a really interesting question. That's a great phrase, secret geometry.
Well,
Um,
I can see the, the golden rectangles that you have in there and the way that
mhm.
everything sort of, you once you get people's eyes into the picture, you don't really let for too many outlets. They just
Right.
keep going round and round. So I'm just kind of curious how much of that is, are you planning that or does it just happen?
Um, yeah, I'm not going to give an easy answer. Yes and no. I mean, I do a lot of planning of that sort of secret geometry, as you call it, in the sketchbook first. And
Hmm.
I come up with a fairly tight idea of what I want to do,
Hmm.
with allowing myself a few outlets in the image. And I close a lot of those sort of as I paint it. I think I would probably actually use the phrase personal geometry.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessarily secret. I think it's personalized for my own interests, needs.
Hmm.
There's sort of a vocabulary or a language of shapes that I've developed over the years.
Hmm. I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious about, so you mentioned that you sort of sketch works out and then you sort of,
Hmm.
make them out. How much of your work would you say is planned out versus experimentation?
Good question. It does vary a little bit piece to piece, but I'd say it's probably 70,
Hmm.
70, 30, or 70, 40 rather.
70-40 for play.
70 for planned out and 40 for
Okay.
play.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I mean that
Interesting.
that varies, but
And I also love the color in this too. I
oh,
thought
thanks.
the color, and
Yeah.
it's great that he's not white, that it's that off color.
Yeah. Well,
It's really
the
nice.
use of found and leftover paints affords sort of a you get some odd colors, I'll just say
Yeah,
that.
right.
And one of the reasons, I mean, if you think about it, one of the reasons people return it is because they thought it was odd too, or they didn't really like it. So that gives me sort of a weird palette sometimes, but
Yeah.
it also affords the opportunity to use intuition
Uh-huh.
and pick from other colors and make something that's interesting. So
I like the term odd paint. I might have to use that for a
yeah,
title.
sure.
That's great. So obviously, you not only you work in a variety of materials, and you had a whole section on your website about works that you make on paper.
Hmm.
Um, so I wanted to ask you, do you have a preference? Do you enjoy working on paper, or is it just because it's what you have, or why?
I really enjoy working on paper. Yes. I go back and forth. So I will do a number of pieces, almost a series in a way, on paper, and then go back to something larger, like the two previous paintings that you've shown. Um, some of it depends on the availability of materials. Sometimes the impetus to paint overtakes the availability of materials, and so I'll just kind of paint on what I have.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I do
What?
occasionally do printmaking, so I often have paper around.
Yeah, I want to ask you about printmaking. Are you doing etchings or screen prints, lithos?
It's mostly etchings, dry point,
Okay.
and yeah,
You have your own press?
I have a very small table press. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I just to get back to this one piece, I'm kind of curious. You had mentioned that you sort of sketch stuff out. This piece almost looks like you were playing with collage to begin with. Is that how do you ever just sketch out with collage, or do you always sketch with just pencils and?
Oh, definitely with collage. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
sometimes it's an overlap because I know the shapes that I have, and I would say stencils rather than collage, but collage is a good way of an entry point.
Okay.
I've always been attracted to sort of the craftsperson approach to painting shapes, where, if you like a shape and you work it out, make a stencil and you can repeat it as many times as you want.
Right.
I think it's probably all also related to my interest in printmaking, a
Yeah.
repetition. So I know those shapes, and so even in my sketchbook, I can draw them out
Yeah.
because I know them. I'm not tracing them in my sketchbook. I know what I have, and so this is a good example of that, where the bottom right shape, the top left shape,
Mm-hmm.
those were stencils I had,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I was sort of working, particularly at this time, this is probably 2019 maybe,
Mm-hmm.
with the idea of just really getting into the idea of the body, or
Mm-hmm.
something vaguely humanoid again. I hadn't really approached that at all for a long
You know,
time.
somebody
Uh,
asked me this question the other day, and it kind of stumped me. They asked me, and I'll ask you, do you consider yourself a figurative painter?
no.
Yeah, that's what I said. Only
Yeah.
because even though I do a lot of figures, I felt it was too limiting. Like I didn't want to, I want to be able to break out of that.
Yeah,
But
it feels like too much of a an art historical precedent that I'm not interested in being part of. No, I mean, I have no offense at all. It's just,
no, no, I totally understand what you mean. I
yeah,
think the audience will too.
yeah,
Um, so I wanted to show this particular painting. So
yeah.
this one goes way back, right? This is several years old,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because my I have a very soft spot for fine art that makes me laugh.
Mm-hmm.
And so, can you please share the title with everybody?
Oh boy, let's see if I can remember it. Home slice, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I showed this to my wife, and immediately she started laughing too. It's just, the idea that that spray suddenly becomes chest hair is
Oh yeah,
just,
yeah,
it's just magnificent.
yeah. Well,
That,
you actually probably would have seen it in some of my pieces at the current exhibit, but I do kind of play with things you can eat, like food,
mhm.
sometimes.
Hmm.
uh, Pastries. And so this one, it reminded me occasionally of like some sort of abstracted slice of cake or something, with a dust of cocoa.
Okay. All right.
And then, of course, some people say, oh man, it's like this guy wearing a
Oh yeah.
weird old timey bathing suit with hair showing through. It's like,
Well, that's the title. The title totally pushes
oh yeah, for
me in that
sure.
direction. So,
Hmm. But
um,
I could see Home Slice being a fun name for a jaunty pastry place.
yeah, that's true. That's good. Quick patent pending. Um, so this is also sort of an older piece, and I
Oh yeah.
to me there's got to be a story behind this.
I
There's
love
got to
this
be
piece. Yeah.
something. So can you tell me a little bit about it?
Uh, I think you might need to help me remember the title of this.
I don't.
Oh,
I'm
that's okay.
taking blank.
I'm pretty sure this is in the collection of a fellow artist who I traded it for.
Hmm.
Um, this is sort of, it's playing with another thing I play with is the idea like abstracted landscape.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so this is sort of like a natural phenomenon that's happening, I think. I mean, that sort of was sort of the beginning of it. And it also ends up sort of looking like a circus, like
Hmm.
there's like circus elements to it.
Hmm.
So like a storm, suggestion of a storm perhaps, or like even maybe a storm passing through a grove of trees,
Hmm.
that sort of thing. And some of it is just like delighting in the surface and the color combinations. Yeah.
It just seemed very whimsical, and I couldn't pin it, right? So it's
Hmm.
one of those pictures that sort of shifts because I do see all that white
Yeah.
as potentially as a cloud or as a smoke, but then the writing totally brings you back, snaps you back, right?
Yeah.
Kind of one
I try to maintain a childlike approach to enjoying looking at something. Um,
success.
yeah, well, good.
You're right. That's fantastic. So I got a series of questions for you. I'm
Hmm.
kind of curious how long you've been making art?
Um, in a serious way since school. So I graduated in 2000. So it's been 20 some years.
Did you go to school for art?
I did. I went to a general, I got a Bachelor of Arts in Bachelor of, what do they call it? Bachelor of Arts in Studio Art. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was just a general religious college. Yeah.
Did you know that you wanted to be an artist when you started school or
That was my intent. Yeah.
okay.
I didn't, much in the way that I live my life, I didn't quite know like what came next. I
Uh-huh.
sort of I knew the direction I wanted to go. This
Uh-huh.
is like me talking about painting a painting, but
Yeah.
um, before I entered school, I was debating between English and uh, and art, and I landed on art.
Okay. Was there anybody in particular that really sort of pushed you really forward, or was it like a combination of everybody?
Mhm. It's a good question. I had some great high school teachers for art
Hmm.
that really kind of encouraged me and pushed me in that direction. I felt like the arts were, it's kind of hard to harken back to the thought process back then, but I felt like the arts had more opportunity for me.
Uh-huh.
Um, that may have been foolish. I don't know, but I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. I think I always felt that if you overthink it, you would never do it, right? So,
Exactly.
right.
Exactly. I agree.
I do want to ask you a question that we had sort of touched on earlier, looking at your work, talking about titles. The title can really switch a piece.
Absolutely.
Um, how important are they to you? And do you find that they often come before or after making the picture?
My usual answer to that is, and people will ask me that in a show or
Hmm.
at the studio, I say it switches back and forth. So sometimes, this probably harkens back to my love of language. I will hear a phrase, like
Hmm.
secret geometry, and I think, ooh, then an image sort of appears there,
Hmm.
and then the title sticks to it
Hmm.
the rest of the way.
Do you ever write them down like good ideas?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah,
you keep a
absolutely,
sketchbook then,
I do. Yeah,
and you
mhm.
and you
I have phrases in there that will be possible titles. Absolutely.
would you ever show your sketchbook in an exhibition?
I was close to it. Yeah, I was
Okay.
close to it. In fact, you may have noticed there was a little bit what we called the ephemera room at the
Yeah.
exhibition where we were both showing it. So those were directly from my sketchbook. I
Okay.
pulled them out.
I'm
I
always
don't know.
encouraging artists to do that because people love to find out like
Oh
process.
yeah.
Now
I
that's
wouldn't show you everything, but
right.
that would,
It's the indecipherable stuff that I really love.
yeah.
Um, kind of curious about say you're gonna go in the studio and you've finished paintings and you're gonna start something new. Do you have a process for inspiration? Is there any go-to for lighting your fire for creativity?
Hmm. One of the ways I've been using recently is I'm keeping a watercolor journal. So I will go in to the studio, and it depends on the day that you've had, how you feel. You just want to sit down and think over things. But I open it up and I start by putting some color on the page.
Okay.
And I try to do one page every time I'm at the studio. And that's helped to both influence what I become interested in. And also you can sort of, as you look at them, you can see things that I was doing then that show up in the page.
Right.
It's very, uh, it's very off the top of my head kind of thing. It's no.
I often ask artists if they have studio rituals. When they start, would you describe that as a ritual for yourself?
It has become one, yeah, in the
Yeah.
last couple of years.
I have another artist friend, Julie Zahn, who she does the same thing, but she has this giant sketchbook and she makes like six little squares and then fills them just like
Hmm.
through her subconscious every morning, not knowing
Yeah,
it, and
that's
then
great.
works on
Yeah, that reminds
it.
me a lot of the what graphic designers call thumbnails, where
Yeah.
they're just working out like tiny little versions. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's great.
Yeah, I used to have a studio mate who used to be a football player,
Mm.
and he had a coach who once told him the most amazing thing. He said, "Thinking slows you down." And I always thought, like, yeah,
Mm.
that's
Yeah,
that's often
it's true.
really
And my brief experience with sports would tell you that is I overthought
right.
it. So,
Right. Yeah, you get frozen if you think too much.
exactly.
So you've been, making artwork for quite a while. How do you feel that your creative process has changed over the years?
I think I've trust myself much more than I used to.
Yeah.
And also I'm far less afraid of failure. I'll just put something down,
Right.
and I know my process well enough now that I have no problem getting rid of something if it doesn't work.
Are you
Covering
faster now?
maybe slightly.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about color because
Hmm.
you're good with color. Um, is your when you're going to create a work, is your palette always pre-planned, or do you make changes midstream?
The palette would be pre-planned very rarely.
Okay.
Occasionally, I will come across a color combination in real time that I record because it works really well.
Okay.
Uh, but even then, I throw in black at the end or something, so it,
Uh-huh.
it rarely stays exactly the way.
When you say
It,
you record, are you like taking a photograph of something that you see or just mental
well,
notes?
now that we have cameras in our pocket, yeah, it can be a. I find that my describing it is actually more appropriate though, because it sort of puts my interpretation of it. So instead of just saying like seeing a purple in the camera that may or may not look the way you remember it,
Huh?
I will write it down so that it rejogs the memory rather than like a photographic
Okay.
recording of it, if that
Right.
makes sense. Yeah, I think it's actually more accurate to what I want.
That makes sense. And it's a trick to make you remember for
Right.
me,
And
at least
and
it
in
is.
my opinion, we trust cameras far too much for that kind of thing.
Yes, we do. Um, so I want to go back a little bit about medium because we talked about painting, works on paper, printmaking. Are there other mediums that maybe you haven't done yet that you're thinking about exploring?
Mm. I
Things
have
like
that.
sculpture, photography, poetry,
Mm.
dance, who knows what?
Yeah. I've dabbled in poetry over the decades. So I've done that for sure. And I think that that really plays off of my title making and that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And also haiku is what I gravitate towards, which is very
Uh-huh.
visual and experiential. So I have done that. I have dabbled in sculptures now and then. Just sometimes some things seem to suggest three dimensions,
Uh-huh.
and two dimensions isn't enough for them. So, but that's pretty rare. I have a few pieces sitting around the studio, but I've only ever shown maybe one of them.
Okay. With the just curious for the sculptures, the same way that you sometimes find mounts to paint on. If you're thinking about sculpture, is it like found materials or are you starting from just like a clay or something?
No, not necessarily that traditional kind of base material direction. It's more like a found object. It would definitely be more like uh, arte povera, that kind of thing.
Okay. All right.
Um, a fun object or an interesting object suggests something else, that sort of thing. Uh, yeah, well, I lost that thought, but anyway, good question.
So I'm the same way that you can find materials that can inspire you to make something. Are you also looking at other artists' works that then maybe give you inspiration? Do you have artists that you like to go to as a wellspring?
Yeah, one of the artists that I've really uh, appreciated recently, living artists. Working at a museum, I see a lot of artists that aren't with us anymore physically. David Cordy, who is, I think, an LA area artist. I really love his work a lot,
Okay.
particularly his most recent stuff. He started out in landscape and sort of ethereal landscape and has moved into this sort of pop art, folk art, sort of inspired, almost like graphic design paintings, which are really great. Um, so I looked at him a lot. I've loved Guston for years.
Yeah. It's hard for me
So
to find a painter who doesn't like Guston.
I know, yeah,
Right.
he's a favorite.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, he always feeds my interest. Matisse, of course. Back in the day, I was
Uh,
very much a Ellsworth Kelly fan.
yeah.
Um, he's far more minimal than me, but I
Yeah.
still find that I get a lot of inspiration from
He's
his.
got some great shapes.
He does, and particularly his interest in distilling the natural world, I find really fascinating.
Yeah. One of the pieces I can't get out of my mind of his was he found a smashed green paper cup in the street
Oh yeah,
and framed it. I love that stupid
yeah.
smashed cup.
His speaking of sketchbooks, his sketchbooks are really inspiring, really
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. So do you find yourself sort of regularly going to, say, museums and art shows, or is that not necessary for you?
Um, I don't think it's necessary, but that's not to say I don't enjoy it. It feels like a busman's holiday sometimes because I work at a museum
Right.
during the week. But I do seek it out. Yeah, much more museums than galleries. I have trouble making it to galleries.
Yeah.
Try to make my friends shows when they have something, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's
I do
very
get out
common.
there.
Yeah. Um, well, I have time for just one more question.
Cool.
Question I ask everybody: what does making art do for you?
Hmm. Well, I would say off the top of my head, two things. It makes me feel like I'm more of a human, and it also helps me stay connected to everything that's around me. It's sort of my bridge between my inside and my outside, if that makes any sense. And that sounds very general, but I think everyone needs to find some bridge that works for them, and this is mine.
Hmm. That makes
Um,
sense. Make
yeah.
total sense. Um, well, Tim, I can't thank you enough for coming by and talking with me
Yeah,
today.
it's
I
been
really
great.
appreciate it. Now I've got more questions now than answers for you, which is great. I'll be definitely following up, seeing your next
Better than the
show.
opposite.
Right, yeah. Oh, he bored me to tears. Yeah, you don't want that. So thank you very much. That was great. And I
Of
want to
course.
thank everybody who tuned in to watch today. We really appreciate it if you like and subscribe to Art Show. It helps push it out to more people so more people can learn about all these great artists. So please tune in again. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Put them in the comment section. If I can't answer them, I'll push them along to Tim. So thank you again for watching. And again, Tim, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
It's been a delight. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.